Hello and welcome to Politics Today. I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Viewers, once again, we are going to talk about Afghanistan because the situation in Afghanistan still is unfolding. We don't know what kind of political structure is going to emerge. As I pointed out yesterday, in yesterday's press conference, Taliban's spokesman actually gave some idea about what kind of government that we are going to see and the liberties that will be enjoyed by the common man, but still a lot has to come. Compared to yesterday, today was a slow news day. We didn't see that much information pouring in until only a couple of hours ago when we learned that Ashraf Ghani, the former president of Afghanistan, has taken refuge in United Arab Emirates. We are going to talk about many aspects, what kind of government we are going to see in coming days. We are going to ask many important questions in order to actually focus on these matters. The guest I've got in the studio and the guest I've got on Skype, I'm going to introduce them. At this moment, I'm joined by Syed Muhammad Ali, who is Director Strategic Affairs, CASS Islamabad. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Tariq Farhadi Saab joins us on Skype, who is representing, actually, he is an Afghan, but he is also an expert on regional affairs. Tariq Farhadi Saab, thank you very much, sir. Always great having you in the show. We are awaiting a third guest. The moment he joins, we are going to actually introduce him as well. Let me, with the permission of Farhadi Saab, let me start with the studio. Muhammad Ali Saab, what kind of government are we expecting will be made? Will it be emirate? Will it be a republic? Will it be something different?
I think realistically speaking, first off, I don't think it will happen immediately. The process is complex and delicate, and it is more realistic to expect that it will be a coalition government. But the emphasis of the Afghan Taliban's leadership and their spokesperson that they want to maintain their Islamic character as they interpret it is significant and consistent, which indicates that notwithstanding the dispensation, it is possible that it is unlikely that they will compromise. If you review all the signals, all the issues on which their spokesperson gave a very important briefing yesterday, whether it was women's rights, whether freedom of media, whether economy, everything he was relating it that everything will be allowed as long as the Islamic character and values are protected.
Right. So, and my question was essentially about the system of governance. I'm not talking about Islamic character that is going to be there. The previous erstwhile constitution also started with the same resolve that it is interpretation of Quran and Sunnah. But what kind of governance structure we are going to see? Is it going to be a representative system? Is it going to be some kind of emirate of the kind that we have seen in UAE or elsewhere, or it is going to be something different?
I think from a political science perspective, it is more realistic that it will be a reflection of the Afghan Taliban Islamic character coupled with the tribal system. So it is unlikely that the current constitutional framework and the Western sponsored political system will survive.
Okay.
That is unlikely for two reasons. Number one, I think ideologically and politically, Afghan Taliban were essentially not confronting and contesting individuals like Mr. Karzai or Mr. Ashraf Ghani. They were defying this philosophy, this political system actually. So politically it will not be acceptable for them. Also to pacify their own rank and file if they compromise on that political system. So even if it is important even for symbolic value internationally as well as to reassure and maintain the loyalty and commitment of their rank and file, that they need to be seen as defeating not just the government, but also replacing the system.
Right, and that is the point. I want to understand what kind of political system might be conceived by the religious elite of Afghanistan or the Taliban. But first, let me bring in Tariq Farhadi Saab. Say your take on what kind of political system to anticipate, to expect in Afghanistan, or is it too premature at this moment?
Greetings to everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I think that we're going towards a system where there will be a prime minister, a strong prime minister, some sort of a shura instead of a parliament, and then there will be a symbolic emir, but if we can call it Islamic government of Afghanistan, that should work. I don't think they will call it republic. I don't think they will call it emirate. They can just call it the Islamic government of Afghanistan. And the emir will be there. The emir could stay in Kandahar. He could stay in Kabul. Wherever he stays, he will be respected. But the affairs of the state would be with the prime minister. The prime minister could be a Talib. It could be somebody else that everyone agrees on. But from the visits of Anas Haqqani and Mullah Mutaki with Karzai and Abdullah, there is an indication that the Taliban are not expecting to rule alone. So it doesn't mean that the Karzai will be in the government or Abdullah will be in the government, but they will be elders, respected elders, and someday they will be in a shura or a majlis. Afghanistan is in a crisis situation right now because the former government collapsed. Ashraf Ghani stole the last $160 million or so and fled. The UAE has now confirmed that he's there. Okay. There's no money in the central bank, and the Afghanistan has about $9.5 billion of reserves. 7 billion of this is in the United States, invested in different banks and gold and securities, but the US has frozen that money. So now Afghanistan cannot pay.
Before you move on, sir, let me ask you about the currency. When we look at the pictures coming from Kabul, we see people are going about their lives, they are selling and purchasing. Of course, they must be using the Afghani, which is the currency there. What is ensuring that it stays afloat if central bank is broke and if the money has been seized by the Americans?
This is a very good question. Afghanistan is going towards a financial crisis manufactured by the international community. Because the international community puts too many conditionalities now, and because the Taliban are very slow to form the government, and that's to the disadvantage of the country, because the Taliban have arrived in Kabul 80 hours ago without firing a bullet, but some of their leaders are still in Doha. Mullah brother arrived in Kandahar, but the whole team should move to Kabul. They should occupy the seat of power. They should bring some other people with them and start a government. Because what is very dangerous is the void situation. The void situation means that Afghanistan today has no government, no ambassador at the United Nations, because their former ambassador was representing Ghani, who is a fugitive now, and his government has collapsed, so he's not an ambassador. So we are in a void. And the passport, Afghan passport, could be not valid. If Afghanistan has to pay a bill, there is no money, and all of this means that the value of the currency is going to depreciate more. Imports, who will pay for imports? Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It imports $10 billion worth of goods every a year almost, and it imports fuel, it imports food, and it imports medicine. Right now, if the international community freezes the assets, who is going to pay for that? We're going to create a humanitarian crisis on this blockade. There has to be a mechanism now. There has to be a mechanism now to allow for a tranche of this money to be released so Afghanistan can pay its bills, even if there is no government. The IMF should do that, or somebody should do that. Somebody should become a caretaker to pay the bills so that the imports
that is a very good point, sir. Farhadi Saab, allow me to actually come back to the studio. I'm going to come back to you in a short while. Let me welcome the third guest who joins us in the studio. Javed Rana Saab is a senior journalist. Javed Rana Saab, at this moment, we were anticipating that the government will be formed, we'll know who's going to actually have decide the policies and everything. Why is it that Afghanistan doesn't have a government? It doesn't have a central banker. It doesn't have the institution, anybody who is controlling the institutions.
I think within the next couple of days, the scene would be clear.
Okay.
Taliban are trying to play very smartly. And they're trying to basically win over the international community by bringing in some ethnic groups into the government.
Okay.
And certainly those individuals would be the ones who they would decide, not the one that the Americans or the other Western countries would like them to be in the government. That has been their long-drawn policy. I've been saying on this very forum with other anchors that they will make their own choices. And within the next couple of days, I foresee that they would form a government. And it is not going to be a kind of an interim setup that everybody is talking about. I don't think this would be an interim setup. Because now the regional rivalries are such, like China and Russia. They've been backing Taliban for their own reasons, for their own geopolitical interests. So I think if China and Russia, they have already indicated if they recognize Taliban government, then Tehran and Islamabad would be next in line. They will be recognizing them. When 5-6 countries, and including those who are the greater powers like Russia and China, they recognize them, then it will be difficult for the other Western countries not to recognize them. But again, at this point of time, it appears the reason they are delaying the formation of the government is because they want to give some legitimacy to the years-long this intra-Afghan peace process. And they want that some kind of inclusive government should emerge out of that process. And that process would certainly provide them some semblance of legitimacy, something they desperately need. Because
I understand that they have to form a government. You said that the foreign countries, especially China and Russia, they are going to recognize, very soon recognize. In order to do that, they have to have a government. They don't have it. What is stopping them from actually putting stop-gap arrangements just to take care of the currency, just to take care of imports, exports? Because at this moment, I don't know how that currency is functioning.
This is a huge financial crisis. This is basically re-establishing a state of Afghanistan. Because the colonial structure that I'm sorry to say that word, you may not like it, that the Americans had
why? Did I establish it?
That the American had set up, that was in disarray, and now it has been demolished. It is going to be formation of a new state of Afghanistan, which means new flag, new law, new constitution, and they are talking about the Sharia law, which means this Afghanistan is going to be very, very different Afghanistan as we have seen during the last 20 years. That Afghanistan would not be there. We have seen the worst part of that Afghanistan in form of Ashraf Ghani. I interviewed the younger brother of Ahmed Shah Massoud just a couple of days ago, and he told me something terrible, and that makes a lot of sense. He said Americans imposed on the Afghan people an imported leadership which had no indigenous grounds, like characters like Ashraf Ghani and even Hamid Karzai. Then at the end of the day, we have seen that he has fled with $160 million in
$26 million.
$26 million. And the only bag that he could not keep in the helicopter and probably
Or
was
in his 4 cars.
his 4 cars was
that money was
the
left.
one, there was no space in it.
Yeah.
So with that kind of leadership, the corrupt warlords that Americans backed, those who were involved in all kind of atrocities, they were made the leaders of Afghan. I think that this was anticipated, and Taliban, I think very sensibly, they cashed in on the public sentiments. They knew that the corrupt leadership was unpopular,
Yeah,
and that is why they swiftly moved in and
I-
took over Afghanistan.
I understand that. My question was about putting some stopgap arrangement to take control of the system. Allow me to actually. I'm going to come back to you. Allow me to.
I forgot that point.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to you. Let me ask you, what is your take on this?
I think it may not be an identical situation, but the closest similar event in history that we can recall in terms of its profound impact is the Iranian Islamic Revolution.
Okay.
Because when we are trying to discuss economy, it is very important from my perspective, from your perspective, from the in terms of a nation state which is normal and functioning member of the International Committee of Nations. But if you put yourself in the shoes of the Afghan Taliban's leadership, for them, their ideology, maintaining the loyalty of their rank and file, establishing a rule which accommodates and legitimizes them, ensuring security is far more important than having a viable economy. And that's why I'm comparing it. I see some semblance of similarity, because when the Iranian Revolution happened, obviously they have suffered for 40 years due to sanctions. But that was an acceptable cost for their political elite. In contrast to maintaining, ensuring, implementing a certain ideology, developing a new political system, a new political. They also introduced a new flag. Okay, and they re-established the state, like you rightly pointed out, according to their worldview, their self-image, and their concern whether the rest of the world accepts them or not was there, but was not the dominant consideration.
I get that. Concern is, no matter whatever the system, there are certain aspects which are going to be there. There's going to be a currency. There's going to be a central bank. There's going to be someone who heads the central bank. At this moment, those institutions are there. And somebody has to sit atop that structure to take care of all these matters. At this moment, yesterday, Afghan Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid himself says there is no government in Afghanistan.
There are 3 things that will perhaps address your question. Number one, since the compromise within the political compromise is still going on, because once that is concluded with other people, how the power and resources are going to be shared and on what basis cannot be decided, number one. So I think this issue, which is very important, that who is going to run the economy, who is going to run the foreign affairs, who is going to run internal security, what is going to happen to the Afghan National Security Force. These are very important issues, but these are administrative issues. First, I think, like Rana Sahab also pointed out, in the next few days, once Afghan Taliban establish a government, then they will address the fundamental issue, whether its form will be similar and only the heads will change, or they will completely, redo the phraseology and the nomenclature according to which, whether they want to be called the emirate and have a shura and perhaps a advisory council which is answerable to Habatullah Sahab, and then they will, something similar to Iran. But that is the fundamental issue, because perhaps even if they appoint a president, he may not enjoy the same power as the previous president enjoyed, because of their ideological structure being essentially different. So once that happens, and I think it is likely in the next few days, these things will be addressed. But my last comment is that economy is very important, but for them, the sort of political culture that they reflect and represent, it is not their dominant consideration.
Right. Tariq Farhadi Sahab, let me ask you about this transition. Taliban movement for past 20 years at least has been an insurgent power, a force. And now there is a time when they have to transform into a political reality, a political entity. Do you think that this transformation will be easy? And earlier you were talking about the possibility of the structure having an emir and then also having a prime minister. When we look at the organogram of Afghan Taliban, there is a head of Taliban and then there is Mullah Brother. Who do you think will be the emir?
We don't know exactly. Let's wait and see. But yes, they have to go through an adjustment. Look, I mean, the Taliban know about governance because outside of Kabul, they have governed in the territories that they have had. Their justice system was appreciated by people because the Afghan government's justice system was corrupt. The justice system of the Taliban was clear. So in some ways they have governed, but no, they have not governed to be in touch with foreign emissaries, except in the last couple of years in Doha, but those were superficial conversations. No, they haven't run a central bank. No, they haven't run a Minister of Finance. If we can arrive at this understanding that they should take the security ministries, for instance, but bring some technocrats to run the central bank, to run the Ministry of Finance, collecting revenues, distributing salaries. This would be a good opportunity, because what we are looking now is that there has to be some mix of in the government, people who are acceptable to Taliban, and if we are not acceptable to Taliban, they can ask us for technical advice. In fact, we Afghans abroad, there's a number of us that would like to help our country come out of the crisis. It's not necessarily that we admired Ghani or we admired the Taliban. We are part of the 35 million people who were not fighting. We were just caught in there. And but we have the expertise to untangle a number of things, such as how to unfreeze the assets of Afghanistan. Now in the United States, they have been frozen, such as how to function the central banks, such as how to start working with the commercial banks to make Islamic loans and get the economy going, such as putting a system that's transparent in the customs regime, because the Ghani system was corrupt and his cronies were stealing about $2 billion a year from customs revenues, sanitizing that. All of that requires people who have that kind of expertise, and there are a number of people who would like to go and help the Taliban for the sake of the country, for the sake of the people. If this situation goes on too long, the trust of the people in the ability of the Taliban to run a technocratic government, a modern government, diminishes. Perhaps the positive point of the Taliban is they can bring security. In the last 72 hours or 80 hours, there hasn't been any security incidents in Kabul. But today in Jalalabad, there were some demonstrations. People like their flag that they have grown up with in the last 20 years, and the Taliban started shooting. Not good. Let them admire their flag. Have two flags. What's the big deal? And then later we can discuss these things in 6 months, 1 year. But Taliban should avoid being violent with people, because then the promise of this force that arrives and occupies and brings security becomes hollow. We want the Taliban to be a little bit more sophisticated than that, guided with what they have said. We are not teaching them anything. Yesterday they said a lot of good words in the words of Zabihullah Mujahid, but Afghans and the rest of the world are saying, is this a good speech? Like Ghani also was making good speech, but at the end he left with $160 million in bags. So the Afghan people want to see the proof in the pudding, not in Mullah Sahib will do this or Emir Sahib will do this. No. We want to see situation improve. We want to, of course, if there is security and the roads are open, relations are good with Pakistan and Iran, the price of food will come down, the price of medicine will come down, the economy can flourish. The Afghan diaspora, which is around the world, can send remittances, it can bring investment projects. If they can run a system without corruption, which is supposed to be in the future, then I myself, I've considered investing in Afghanistan, but during Ghani, the corruption was such that you have to pay off somebody to do anything. If in the future we have
and that is a moment of reflection for everybody who thought that there might be an institutional structure there. Allow me to come back to the studio. And let me ask you, Javed Rana Saab, earlier you wanted to comment on institutional structures as well, especially currency. But there is a reason why I actually brought up the issue of who's going to be the Prime Minister, who's going to be Emir, and whether the Taliban's Amir is going to be a separate entity, right? Because Mullah Abdullah is the Amir of Taliban, but Mullah Baradar has become quite a visible force. And finally, Mullah Yaqub and Haqqanis are also a factor. So now in coming days, are there going to be 3 centers of power, 4 centers of power, 1 center of power? We have to actually contend with that as well. So what kind of structure you see? And then, of course, you can comment on what you wanted to comment earlier.
I think Taliban is essentially an ideological force.
Yeah.
They go by the Sharia law. And as compared to other political party or any other private and public organization anywhere in the world, they are far more disciplined, well organized, and have unity within their ranks and files. I don't think there is any leadership crisis within their ranks and files.
Not today.
Not today, and
when they have a power structure, everyone has.
I don't expect that it would happen tomorrow, because the kind of the unity they have proven over the course of time, that I think that contain the chances of any conflict within the ranks and files of the Taliban. And Mullah Hibatullah was the Chief Justice of Afghan Taliban during their first government. And
Mullah Yaqub is son of Mullah Umar.
Son. But of course, Mullah Hibatullah has a huge influence, what is generally known among the Taliban as Sheikhul Tafsir. This is a big rank within the religious clergy, and he enjoys huge respect. I think his word on the leadership would be final, and presumably, we can assume, we don't know at this point of time, he would be there is going to be change in the nomenclature. No president, no prime minister. He would be either Amirul Mominin, or maybe he would find some other title of similar nature, but most probably it's going to be Amirul Mominin.
Okay.
And then I think
yesterday I was corrected by a Pashtun friend when I said Hibatullah. They said it is Habtullah. I don't know whether it is true or not, but it is not about fear or anything, as Habbat means. It is something like gift of God. Habtullah. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, I think they will form their leadership. I mean, whatever the Amirul Mominin and their cabinet would be formed within the next couple of weeks, maybe take a week time, depending how their negotiations unfold in Doha. All these negotiations are more as a smoke screen of something which Taliban, I believe, have already decided, because all political assessments that everybody had, that Americans had, that we here in Islamabad had, they have proven them wrong. Right? Everybody thought that they will start recapturing Afghanistan from the east and southern belt, and from then they'll move towards north, and then they will come to the Kabul. They started from the north, because they have proven over the period of time that they have not only defeated Americans in the battlefield, but also on the table talk. And you see, they lingered on negotiations with the government with the Ashraf Ghani government, and then militarily they recaptured entire Afghanistan, and then they are not talking about negotiated settlement.
And which institutions.
And I think they are.
I mean, no matter what you call them, if there is going to be police, there is going to be a police chief. If there is going to be intelligence, there is going to be intelligence chief. If there is going to be currency, there is going to be a central bank. If there is going to be budgets, there is going to be a minister for finance.
Now, the biggest challenge on the economy, the point that I wanted to raise about, is that they have vowed that they would change the structure of the economy, because under the Islamic laws, you cannot have an interest-based economy.
Okay.
And Afghanistan under Ashraf Ghani government was, I assume, running through interest-based economy. This entire system was interest-based. So I think when you are going to restructure the system, there are going to be some pains in the beginning. And the problems would certainly emerge. You have rightly pointed them out. Initially, these problems would be there. But again, we should not underestimate that they don't have the expertise among their people, or they cannot hire people who can run their economy.
Right. Sayyid Muhammad Ali Saab, because we are talking about institutions, let me also ask about the system. We are saying that they are working out the system. They were in Doha, they had a political office, they kept on negotiating. Have they worked out a constitution already? Do they know what they are going to go for? Or are we going to wait for months to know what kind of system is coming?
I think it's a very important question. I think there are four things which they are trying to balance.
Yeah.
Their ideological interpretation of their worldview, their philosophy. Secondly, the loyalty of their own rank and file.
Right.
Third, to develop some sort of political legitimacy within the other communities which do not share their ideology within Afghanistan, including diaspora, and that is a very important point that my friend Tariq Fawadi Saab also pointed out. The fourth thing is basically luring and making themselves acceptable to the international community and international institutions.
All right.
So they are trying to square this circle by achieving a delicate balancing act between these four conflicting demands. Now, what is likely to happen quickly? I think from the logic of political science, it is more likely to be a theocratic structure rather than a democratic structure.
Right.
And as a student of political science, although the ideology is different, but the form and structure might be similar to Iran for three reasons. A slight, different point of view from
Iran is a modern state, by the way.
Yes, but
even if you call it a theocracy.
I'm talking in terms of political science, distribution of power. It is more likely because, and I'm going to explain these four things in the context of the likely structure that we are expected to see. They already have these committees that you mentioned. They have 5 committees. The gentleman who's heading the talks is Mr. Baradar is looking after the negotiations and the political office. Somebody else looks after the intelligence setup. Somebody else looks after the security setup. Somebody else looks after the economic aspect. So they have the committees. Now, but the structure, how they will reconcile the international legitimacy with their ideology and domestic needs. It is more likely that Mr. Heptullah is likely to be a sort of an ideological leader, but the Mr. Baradar is likely to be the political figurehead, who will be answerable to him, but he will be sharing the power in the similar to Iranian Guardian Council. There will be a shura which will allow the different power centers, like whether it is the Haqqani Saab, whether it is Mullah Yaqub, whether others, to give their counsel and perspective, and that will allow the interests and perspectives to be aggregated, articulated and implemented by the president or the who will be answerable to the ideological leader. This seems the more likely structure.
The ideological leader is going to be head of state?
Head of state.
And the other one is going to be the head of executive?
Similar to the leadership, like for example, the Iranian leadership. You have Mr. Ali Khamenei, who is the ideological leadership. His job is not to take decisions. His job is to provide an ideological oversight that the political decisions, the statecraft are in line with the preservation of the ideological character of the state.
Right.
So I see a similar structure emerging in which Heptullah Saab is going to be the ideological head. He'll ensure the ideological foundations are preserved, but the political decisions taken by someone who could be called a president or something else, but he'll be advised by a council which will allow the interests of the different groups to be aggregated.
Right.
So this essentially will be a theocratic state,
Right.
but it will allow, the form will be different, but the economy, the currency, the functions will be similar like any other
There
modern
will
state.
be elements that are
Yes,
there, right?
yes. That's more likely in my view.
But since you were talking about, the Amir of Taliban, and then you were talking
Yes.
about chief executive, whatever
Yes,
his
yes.
title may be,
Yes.
that too also with Taliban. So all power stays with Taliban then.
I think where the compromise is likely is when they allow somebody to sit on the advisory council,
Right.
which allows them to give their input, give their perspective, and share the decision-making process,
So you are
which is in
technically-
line with the Pashtun Wali culture as well.
Right. And you're talking about three centers of power then. And
think it depend-
fourth, if there is a chief justice and a judicial system. as
Yes,
well.
yes, yes.
So that is quite interesting. Let me go back to Farhadi Saab. Sir, my question is that if they are working it out now, they have been in talks with almost everybody for more than a year. Abdullah has been going to Doha. Other leaders have also done it. So haven't they actually finished the groundwork for what kind of system comes? Or it is going to actually happen after the ground realities have shifted?
I think it's the latter, because even Abdullah, who has been going to Doha, was not really
Farhadi Saab,
authorized.
you'll have to unmute your mic, sir. We can't hear you. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
I think it's the latter. Although Abdullah has been going to Doha to negotiate, but they have not really negotiated because he was not authorized to put Ghani's resignation on the table. In fact, Abdullah has been very faithful to Ghani because he could have challenged Ghani 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and offer his resignation. But his style is he was hoping to find a solution that was impossible to find. So now we are in front of accomplished facts. The Taliban are there, and Abdullah and others will have to agree with what the Taliban propose. But some semblance of a modern state is necessary in order for the international community to recognize the Taliban government. Absent that, the Taliban might establish their imaginary system, whatever it is. But if the international community doesn't recognize them, Afghanistan will face a financial crisis, and that will create a poverty and refugees, and again refugees will come to Pakistan and Iran and Europe. It is to the benefit of the Western world to coach the Taliban towards something that's acceptable to the Taliban, but also acceptable to the Western world, and keep Afghanistan as a semblance of a modern state without calling it a democracy or a republic. But Afghanistan will have to interact in the world community, even with its neighbors. It will have to interact based on modern business accepted practices. So they can have any system they want, but it has to be a modern government.
Right. Let me ask you, it is a tangent, but let me ask you about Ashraf Ghani. Now that we know where he is, and now that we know that he might have taken this much money, is there going to be some kind of reaction? What might that be, sir? Is there going to be some kind of litigation somewhere internationally, or if UAE has given him refuge, the story is over?
He took $160 million reportedly and he got refuge on humanitarian basis. So this is a millionaire that got refuge on humanitarian basis. But the best authorities that can investigate him is the American government, because it was their money. Yeah. Ashraf Ghani defrauded the American taxpayer by saying that he had a 300,000 people army and charging salaries that he didn't have. He defrauded the donors. His cash comes from donor money with a very sophisticated way to charge the donors for things that didn't exist. So someday, yes, it has happened with leaders in South America. Someday, when the US administration has the time and opportunity, they will go after him. That might be several years from now. I have dealt with cases like this in the Middle East in my career. It's very difficult to hold corrupt leaders to the fire of international law. It's very difficult because they don't put the money in a bank account in their own name. It's fanned all over the place, and it's very difficult to really unearth it later. Our countries, unfortunately, have these kinds of legacies, if you know what I mean.
Right. That's quite important. Let me come back to Javed Rana Sahab. Javed Rana Sahab, earlier you were talking about economy, and you said because Islam doesn't approve of interest, they are going to have a very unique kind of economic system. Earlier, Muhammad Ali Sahab was also talking about theocracy. From that, I get the picture that it might be more like a Vatican for the lack of examples. Is there an example of a Muslim country where such an economic system actually exists?
Nowhere, frankly, because the last Islamic empire that we had, it went up to 1924, but I think effectively it ended in 1908. So, and then the interest was already there in that Ottoman Empire. Yeah. So from there onwards, I don't recall any such genuine example where a Muslim country's economy was run without interest. So that would be unique example. They have to prove it because they said they are going to establish an Islamic emirate or Islamic government. So now it is quite challenging because they have to establish altogether a new structure of economy which is free of interest. And by the way, all over the world now there is a greater realization that the interest is a part of the problem, and in many countries banks are now registering negative interest, at least zero interest, because it is exploitative in the nature. But the trouble with Taliban would be how to establish an altogether new system where people are not exploited. It would take time. Again, the point that I early on made, there will be initially problems, there would be initially economic crisis, maybe, but I think in the long run they would be able to manage it. Yeah. What is their expertise right now? They can establish peace. That is what they did from 1996 to 2001. The West used to call it cynically as a silence in the graveyard. Yeah. But the fact of the matter was that the crime rate was almost, at a very minimal level. And anybody who, the murder case used to be decided within a week, something we cannot think of in our country.
Right. But because you spoke about them inventing a new system, right? Naturally, because we don't have an example, you might be able to invent some system which in isolation may not depend on interest. In the end, it is going to be part of a global system. So elsewhere it is interest. So I don't know how you actually work out.
Yes, exactly.
But I want to go on another tangent. And I want you to actually answer a political question. Allow me. Civil war. You said they can bring about peace, right? I remember 96 when they almost took over the entire country, but then there was civil war with the Panchsheris. Then in 2001, we thought that they are over, they disappeared, but now they are a reality. Are we sure today that it is the end of civil war? and they have become a reality which is going to hold for 5, 10, 20 years?
I can clearly foresee that it is end of war, end of civil war in Afghanistan now. Because right at this very forum in December 2019, in one of the program at PTV, I had predicted that the Taliban would take over Afghanistan within a matter of weeks once the American exit from there. And even at that point of time, I had said that since Ahmad Shah Massoud is not there, and the Northern Alliance is not there symbolically, and the Taliban have their made roots inside the northern part of Afghanistan, I don't see any resistance from the northern region. Many analysts in the West, they think that there would be regrouping of the Northern Alliance. Northern Alliance would be able to establish their own militia. I don't see that happening. Partly now Iran is not going to support the Northern Alliance, and then more importantly, all those minority groups which could possibly have resisted Taliban or can possibly resist in future, Taliban have tried to give them some positions in their ranks and files even before forming the government. So I don't foresee that happening. Their biggest challenge, as you have rightly pointed out, is economy. How to establish a new economic order when the countries around Afghanistan, when the economic world order is interest-based and they have to establish an interest-free economy. I think to begin with, internally, they can make it an interest-based economic system. And externally, they will have to come up with the innovative ideas where they are not dependent on the donor agencies like IMF and the World Bank. I don't expect that the Taliban would approach like us to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund for any funding. They will establish it. How they establish it, it is anybody's guess. But again, they have the minerals. If they give if they can bargain with China and with other countries, and they can earn a lot of money. They may not be as much dependent onto the West as the other third world countries are. I foresee that they would be able to establish it, but it will certainly take time.
Right, and I'm going to take this as your conclusion because we are actually running out of time. I'm very quickly going to ask Syed Muhammad Ali Saab if he wants to conclude, because these matters at this moment, the world media seems to be panicked and they're not talking about these matters at all. These are important as well.
I think just 4 sentences. Number one, psychologically the development is very positive, that the Indian narrative that Pakistan was supporting Afghan Taliban has been defeated and exposed, because the current debate has shifted within the US. And the Republicans are criticizing the Biden administration. The Indians and NDS and other cronies of Ashraf Ghani are blaming America for letting them down. So that is useful. Secondly, diplomatically, I think I endorse the point by Rana Saab that China is going to be very important, because for the economic challenges that Afghanistan faces, it is very important that Afghanistan is likely to remain in the center of the new great game in Eurasian landmass, and China will not allow the new government in Kabul to be dependent and vulnerable to Western coercion. So there is chances that they might help them economically through Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and other facilities as well.
Right. Tariq Farhadi sir, very quickly, sir, your conclusion. Once again, sir, Mike. Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
There is a lot of unknowns. Taliban are not the first Muslims in the world. There is also interest-free economy in Saudi Arabia. The models already exist. We don't need to invent a lot of things. Taliban have to consult the people who have been around and have been working in Muslim economies as well. Taliban will not have all the answers, and if they pretend to have all the answers, they will not be accepted by the people of Afghanistan.
Right. That was quite a conclusion, sir. Thank you very much, Tariq Farhadi sir, for being part of the program. Let me thank Javed Rana Saab, also Syed Muhammad Ali Saab. Thank you very much, sirs, for your precious time. Viewers, this was today's program. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.